Tonight, you're not strolling under triumphal arches or listening to senators argue themselves sleepy. You're turning down a side street Rome pretends not to have. Before you fall asleep, you'll walk the Subura after dark past doors that refuse to face the forum, past painted arrows and quiet cubicles with low, narrow beds, and into a city where desire has a license, a ledger line, and a tax rate. You'll see how ediles count lamps and fines, how little bronze tokens whisper prices without names, and how laws thunder in daylight, then look carefully away at night. Oil lamps hiss along the walls. A bronze wind chime ticks against a nail, marking time for no one in particular. Sandals whisper on pumice stone. A curtain where a door should be breathes in and out like a patient lung. From the street, you smell oil, cheap perfume, and laundry that almost dried. If you keep your eyes forward, this is just another dark Roman alley. If you let your gaze slide sideways, the whole district wakes up. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share where and what time you're listening from, perhaps the next soft clink of a doorway chime will remember you there, half awake while Rome quietly adds the night to its accounts. Because this story of forbidden streets doesn't begin with a courtroom or a sermon. It begins with a sideways door and a lamp that never quite goes out. You might not expect the quietest part of Rome to be the loudest street in its imagination, but that is more or less what happens after sunset in the Subura. The marble forums and arches are going to bed. The serious people have gone home with their togas folded neatly, but just a hill away, the oil lamps in the poorer quarter cough themselves awake. A bronze wind chime taps irregularly against a nail, as if even the breeze is a little tipsy. Sandals scrape on pumice stone, and somewhere a curtain where a door should be moves in and out like a tired lung. The houses along this street do something slightly suspicious. In a city obsessed with straight lines and public facades, these doorways point almost everywhere except toward the proper public roads. Some open sideways from narrow alleys, some are simply gaps in walls, half hidden behind wooden screens or bead curtains. Roman moralists would say that a respectable door faces the forum. These doors face their own business, which is to say, yours. A passerby who looks straight ahead will see nothing but uneven brick. Someone who glances just a little too long will catch a sliver of lamplight and maybe the outline of a low bed pushed sideways against a wall. The law likes to pretend these rooms are ordinary rental cubicles, so the architecture politely agrees and refuses to contradict it. Inside, the furnishings are almost disappointingly functional. A narrow bed, low enough that an unlucky client might bang a knee on the frame. A little niche in the wall for a lamp. Perhaps a small table that has seen more elbows than plates. On some nights, the most expensive item in the room is the curtain itself. It billows a little when someone walks past, a slow breath that smells of oil, cheap perfume, and the very faint memory of laundry day. Prices are not written on the wall in neat numerals. That would be too honest. They're murmured at the threshold, or scratched in tiny letters where only someone leaning very close can read them. Rome prefers its hypocrisy low and its handwriting even lower. Not everyone is allowed to play this game. The Subura has its own traffic rules that run parallel to the official ones. Respectable matrons in heavy stola dresses stay indoors or take the long way somewhere else before the purple in the sky turns black. Freedmen can wander with slightly more freedom. They have already crossed one line in life, and the city senses they are willing to cross others. Slaves carry baskets or amphorae and somehow move the most confidently of all, because they are not the ones who will be blamed if anything interesting happens. The real monitors of behavior are the watchmen, the vigils, who drift through with small lamps, counting flames instead of people. Some were aediles, the magistrates of markets and morals, hold tablets of fines that say how wrong it is to do the things everyone is already doing. The streets are full but also carefully choreographed. A woman with a dyed wig, scandalously red, is not technically advertising. She is just very committed to her hairstyle. A girl in a loose cloak, called a toga forbidden to respectable women, walks with her head up and her pace slow, making it clear that she is both available and already classified by the state as someone whose virtue is on permanent, irrevocable sale. A soldier on leave looks at her, looks away, looks back again, performing a moral struggle that will end exactly where everyone expects it to. Night is permitted, but only if it behaves like a rumor, visible from the corner of the eye, never looked at head-on. Somewhere above all this foot traffic, a quietly thrilling thing happens. Someone takes out a stylus and inscribes a name into a wax tablet. A landlord writes that he is leasing a back room to a certain woman of a certain status, which might or might not be the same status she had yesterday. Alino, a brothel keeper, registers his address with the local magistrates, as if he is opening a very small, very specialized branch of the hospitality industry. In return, behind the scenes, the city places him not in the moral ledger, but in the fiscal one. A few lines of bureaucratic Latin and suddenly desire becomes taxable. The empire, it turns out, is extremely good at turning awkward conversations into tidy columns. A woman who sells herself is not simply a person anymore. On paper, she becomes a meretrix with a registered name, a registered payment, and occasionally a registered tax rate. A small fee flickers from her pocket to the aedile's office, and from there to the city coffers. No emperor will ever stand up in the forum and say, "Good news, citizens, the brothel sector is booming," but the numbers know it. The simplest thing is to regulate what you cannot erase. You give it an entry in the ledger, and once it lives on the page, it behaves as calmly as any shipment of grain. Proof of legality comes in humble, easily lost form. A bronze tag on a string, perhaps, stamped with the name of the establishment. Sometimes a small wax tablet with a seal pressed into it, soft as cheese when warm, rigid, and official when cool. These objects are at once deeply boring and oddly powerful. To an outsider, they're just bits of metal or wax. To the owner, they read the difference between a tolerated establishment and a very expensive misunderstanding with the law. The same hands that scratch love poems on walls also press seals into wax, leaving behind tiny official thunderstorms in miniature, the state's thunder shrunk down to thumbprint size. While people are figuring out the legal side of their vices, the buildings themselves keep a quieter language. Near some doorways, small wind bells called tintinnabula ring when the curtain moves. They pretend to be simple charms against bad luck, but they also make excellent doorbells that do not require a doorknob. A passerby hears a light, merry jingle and knows the room is open for business. Someone more nervous can pretend they are just admiring the craftsmanship of the little bronze phalluses swinging in the breeze. A single lamp in the doorway means the room is ready. A second lamp might mean the house is busy tonight. A curtain tied in a knot says, "Wait." A curtain fully drawn aside says, "Come in," assuming nobody else got there first. The walls, too, carry signals for eyes that have learned to read them. Painted scenes of Venus carefully avoid showing anything that could later be described in court. Instead, they hint. A woman adjusting her sandal is somehow more suggestive than a naked goddess, because her practical pose looks like the moment before something else. Grapes, dolphins, and other respectable motifs clutter the plaster in such a way that you can always say you were just looking at the fruit. Rome likes its signs like it likes its laws, technically innocent, functionally obvious. The economy of the night needs small, portable ways to remember promises, so tiny bronzes begin to circulate. They are the size of coins, but lack the comforting profile of the emperor. Instead, they show numbers or athletic poses or scenes that would make a censor reach for his red ink. Some modern scholars think they are brothel tokens. Others swear they are part of a board game, as if some family sat down after dinner to move little obscene discs around a grid. It is entirely possible they did both. Whatever their intended use, they move from palm to palm with a flutter that feels more like gossip than commerce. Imagine one of these tokens resting in your hand, slightly warm from the last person who held it. The edges are worn smooth. The image in the center is half rubbed away by years of being thumbed nervously. It is not officially money, but everyone seems to know what it can purchase. You close your fingers around it and it feels heavier than its size should allow, as if embarrassment itself has weight. It would be hard to explain to a magistrate why you are carrying it. It is easier to explain inside the right doorway, under the right lamp. The walls around you are another sort of account book. In the harsher daylight, when the last clients stumble away and the first bread buyers emerge, the Sabura's brick surfaces are revealed as pages written by hundreds of hands. There are crude drawings, boasts, complaints about inflated prices, and the eternal promise that someone named so-and-so was here long before you. These scrawls are not meant to be permanent, but they last longer than most of the agreements they describe. Magistrates' edicts may be erased, but Felix Love Sithers lingers until someone plasters over it, and even then the ghost of the letters sometimes shows through. Whitewash teams come at intervals, armed with brushes and buckets, to give the streets a fresh moral complexion. They sweep their lime past all the little inscriptions, muffling them like conversations behind closed doors. For a few days, the walls look blank and respectable. Then, as soon as nobody is watching too closely, a stylus taps against the dried surface. Lines appear again, crooked but determined. The city never truly forgets. It just takes short breaks from remembering in public. In this way, the cheapest materials, chalk, charcoal, broken potsherds, end up keeping a more detailed record of desire than all the shiny bronze tablets in the Edil's office. Surrounding all this improvisation is a web of laws that pretends not to see what it is very carefully regulating. Statutes like the Lex Iulia on adultery thunder against illicit sex, insisting that marriage is sacred and that wandering husbands, though common as pigeons, will not be tolerated. Yet the same legal tradition cheerfully distinguishes between the honor of a matron and the utility of a registered prostitute. One must be defended, the other taxed. A soldier who slips into a licensed house may pay a fine if caught, not for the act itself, but for disrespecting his uniform and, very importantly, his shift schedule. The city's moral posture is almost comic in its effortful uprightness. If you sketched Rome as a person at this hour, it would be someone standing very straight eyes focused on the capital hands, clasped studiously in front, while their feet remain planted firmly in a neighborhood where none of that seriousness applies. Officials insist that adultery is a crime, but they also maintain ledgers of establishments where adultery is more or less the house special. A magistrate will walk briskly past a curtain he definitely does not see, only pausing a street away to remind his clerk to make sure the brothel's owner has paid the proper fee for his license. In the middle of this contradiction, you, the hypothetical night walker, perform your own small dance with the rules. You know that there are streets a respectable person should not use after dark, which makes them at once forbidden and irresistibly convenient shortcuts. You adjust your cloak so it covers just a little more of your face. You pass a doorway where soft laughter seeps through the curtain like steam, and you look carefully at the paving stones instead. A tiny chime rings behind you, and for a ridiculous moment, it feels as though the city itself has winked. If we were to write a bedtime oath for someone walking through Rome's night without getting into trouble, or at least without generating paperwork, it would be very simple. You keep facts in separate containers. In one jar, you place the tokens, the chalk marks, the whispered directions to a certain house with a certain curtain. In another jar, you place the official decrees, sealed tablets, and stern speeches in the Senate. You never, under any circumstances, pour one jar into the other. In the morning, when the sun turns the streets honest again, you can pretend you have only ever handled the second jar. By dawn, the oil lamps have gone out one by one, like eyes closing. Curtains hang limp, suddenly just cloth again. The bronze chimes are still, frozen mid-note until the next breeze. A girl in a dyed wig rubs sleep from her eyes and ties on an apron to buy bread, looking for all the world like any other neighbor. The vigils who spent the night counting lamps and listening for trouble yawn and hand over the streets to daytime officials who count traffic and litigate property lines. Rome, having spent another night insisting that its forbidden streets are merely unfortunate rumors, stretches, mutters something about public virtue, and carries on. And somewhere, on a small table in an Edow's office, a wax tablet cools. On it is written the full official story of last night. Names, payments, fines, licenses renewed. It is perfectly composed, non-scandalous, and tidy. It is not, of course, the whole truth, but it is enough truth for the daylight hours. The rest of the story stays in the sound of fading footsteps and the memory of thin curtains moving in and out, like a city breathing quietly in its sleep. You might not expect a city famous for marble temples and heroic speeches to also keep a quiet filing system for its brothels, but Rome, being Rome, did. When the day's orators finally ran out of breath in the forum, another kind of business unrolled itself in the side streets, in doorways that somehow never pointed toward the respectable squares. So tonight, we are not following the senator's home. We are taking a slower road into the Subura, where the streets remember more footsteps than the history books do. If you happen to still be awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe or follow or do whatever people do now. But honestly, if the Subura puts you gently to sleep instead, that might be the most historically accurate reaction of all. Imagine Rome after sunset. The grand forum's dim, torches lower, and what little breeze there is smells faintly of olives, smoke, and yesterday's arguments. The Subura, the crowded district tucked between hills, does not go quiet in the same way. Its buildings lean toward each other as if gossiping across the alleys. The streets here are narrow enough that if two people stretch their arms out from opposite windows, their fingertips could pass a secret along. And along these walls are doors that do not face the forum, as if they are politely turning their backs on public life. Some are not doors in the usual sense at all. Sometimes you just see a curtain of thick, fading fabric hanging in a doorway, breathing in and out with every passerby, letting a little lamplight leak onto the cobblestones. If you stand there, just inside the alley's shadow, you notice the details the guidebooks skip. On one wall, a painted phallus points like an arrow, slightly too large, slightly too cheerful for anyone to pretend they misunderstand it. It might have wings because of course it does. Another wall offers a crude sketch of a bed. Someone has added, in quick scratch letters, a name, then scratched it out again. Doors are low and narrow, as if modesty were a structural feature. Inside, the room is often no bigger than the bed itself, a little brick chamber with a niche in the wall for an oil lamp, and, if the owner is ambitious, a stubby shelf pretending to be a bedside table. The ceiling is close. Sound doesn't have far to go before it finds a wall to lean on. Prices are not announced loudly. There is no menu nailed to the door. Instead, a few numbers might be scratched discreetly into the plaster at ankle height, where only someone already leaning near the entrance would see them. The numbers are small, like the coins that will answer them. You can tell the neighborhood is experienced in ambiguity. Almost everything can be read two ways, sometimes three. A padlocked box by the door might hold linens, or it might hold the ledgers that say how many linens were really needed. The street knows who is supposed to walk here and how they should do it. Respectable matrons in their stola, the long layered dress of status, are not theoretically meant to see any of this. If they pass through at all, it is early, on the way back from a shrine or a shop, with slaves in front to collect any stares and slaves behind to sweep away any rumors. By the time the lamps are fully lit, they have melted into the safer light of their own atriums. The people who remain are a different census. Men in tunics, cloaks slung carelessly, soldiers off duty, clerks who left their wax tablets at home but carry the calculations in their heads anyway. And the women here are marked in subtle ways, perhaps with a colored wig that does not quite match their eyebrows, perhaps with a looser cloak, the sort jokingly called a toga when worn by someone who is not supposed to wear one. At the edge of this little theater, men called ediles drift through in pairs. They are minor officials, caretakers of markets and streets, and also the reluctant babysitters of vice. They carry tablets with lists of regulations and fines, which is not as dramatic as a sword, but sometimes more frightening. They count lamps that hang outside doorways, making sure no unauthorized flames are inviting accidents. They count women too, indoors, and license tags, muttering under their breath. You can almost hear the city's nervous system at work through them, trying to keep the chaos inside a format it can tax. Night is allowed, but only if it fills out the correct forms. Somewhere behind these doors and curtains are names that belong to another Rome, a Rome written down on wax and papyrus. When a woman decides or is forced to register as a meretrix, a prostitute in the legal sense, she does not just step into a room and begin. She goes to an office. A lino, the keeper of a brothel, or the manager of a single rented room may go too. There will be a clerk, probably bored, definitely overfamiliar with this process, who scratches her name into a register. The letters press into wax. Someday they will be copied to papyrus. The act feels administrative rather than romantic. With one entry, the law says, "You are no longer a respectable woman." But the same line also says, "You are now taxable." It is an odd system. A woman who remains technically respectable, but behaves scandalously is a moral problem. A registered meretrix is simply an economic category. She pays a fee, or her manager does, and suddenly what was invisible becomes a line in a ledger that can be added, subtracted compared to last year's line. The house itself may be registered too. The lino lists the address, the number of rooms, perhaps even the type of services, though this is written in delicate shorthand. No moralist can quote in court. With every new entry, the city tightens its grip and, ironically, widens the space in which people can misbehave without technically breaking the rules. Licenses do something else too. They create paperwork. And paperwork in Rome never travels alone. For every fee, there is a receipt. For every registered house, a file tucked into some pigeonhole of the edile's office. The edile's stamp, pressed onto a small metal tag or a wax tablet, becomes a strange kind of blessing. It does not say, "This is good." It says, "This is counted." Once something is counted, the law feels calmer about letting it exist. It is a bit like how modern apps feel calmer about your habits once they can turn them into colorful graphs. You can almost picture the moment when a new house in the Subura gets its official nod. The lino brings a wax tablet, hands smelling faintly of wine and lamp oil. The edile checks the address, maybe raises an eyebrow at a suggestive street nickname, then presses his seal. Somewhere, far from the glare of the forum, a little piece of metal is hung discreetly inside a doorway, proof that this particular spot of human entanglement is now a recognized part of the Roman economy. It is legality in miniature, hanging on a nail. Inside, the rooms communicate in a different language. Bells called tintinnabula dangle at the entrance, chiming softly whenever the curtain moves. Some are simple, just small bronze bells. Others are more talkative, shaped like birds or tiny human figures that jingle when the wind has an opinion. The sound is part advertisement, part warning. It says, "There is activity here," and also, "You are not just imagining it." The walls are covered in messages that don't need vowels. A painted cup might mean wine is sold. A painted bed means the obvious. A painted phallus with a crown might promise something more theatrical. Symbols are useful. They speak to anyone, even those who cannot read the legal notices outside. In one doorway, a green curtain might signal that the room is busy. In another, a lamp turned sideways means wait, while a second lamp lit beside it means hurry. A knot in the curtain. Cord has a meaning everyone in the alley understands and no magistrate can prove. All of this creates a kind of parallel language, one that e-dials pretend not to see unless they need to write a report. The law, you notice, travels slowly compared to rumor. A new regulation might take months to circulate. A new symbol on a doorway is understood before the paint is dry. Rome's official texts move along the major streets, carried by clerks in respectable shoes. The symbols of the Subura slide under the doorways, carried by glances and small coins. Both languages are Roman, only one is archived. Speaking of coins, the night economy has its own favorite puzzle pieces. Small bronze discs, no bigger than your thumbnail, pass from hand to hand here. They look like coins, but they are not imperial currency. The emperor's portrait is conspicuously absent, as if he has politely declined to attend this particular party. Instead, there are numbers and little images, a couple in a particular pose, or a single figure turning toward another. Modern scholars call them sphinxi, partly because it sounds learned, and partly because nobody is entirely sure what else to call them. What were they for? That is the kind of question ancient history loves to leave in the probably folder. Some suggest they were tokens used in brothels, a way to prepay for a certain kind of service without having to declare it out loud. Others argue they might have been gaming counters, the ancient equivalent of casino chips with extremely direct illustrations. There is also the modest theory that they were just a very specific kind of novelty item, the sort of thing a bachelor uncle might bring back from a holiday in Pompeii. Whatever their purpose, they had one very practical function. You could hand them over silently. Picture a client approaching a desk, or perhaps a doorway. Instead of negotiating loudly in bad poetry, he palms one of these tokens and passes it discreetly. The weight of the disc in the other person's hand says everything. The image on the token saves both parties the trouble of naming anything. If anyone official happens to be watching, it's just a man handing over a small piece of bronze, which could mean almost anything: a bet, a tip, a private joke. It is payment designed to fit exactly inside the blind spot of public morality. The walls record these transactions in their own way. In places like Pompeii, preserved as if time took a snapshot, you can still read the graffiti written by people who grew bored waiting, or who left reviews with a thoroughness modern websites might envy. There are boasts and complaints, prices and preferences, jokes that were probably not funny even then. Names appear, sometimes with hearts, sometimes with less affectionate symbols. A lover might be praised on one wall and gently insulted on the opposite one, suggesting that customer satisfaction surveys were as mixed in antiquity as they are now. Graffiti outlives the people who write it in a strange way. The chalk marks the e-dials used to note fines or to tally lamps will be washed away by morning, but the scratched comments of a bored soldier can cling to a brick for centuries. The city's official minutes crumble. Its bathroom humor survives rainstorms, earthquakes, and archaeologists. It is possible that if you walk those streets at night, you could read 3 layers of text at once: the fading official notices, the fresh chalk of the inspectors, and the carved whispers of customers and workers. The last, ironically, is often the only one we can still see. Over all of this, Roman law hovers in a state of deliberate squinting. Certain things are forbiddens. Adultery, for instance, is taken very seriously, as any husband loudly announcing his grievances will explain at length. There are laws like the Lex Aelia that thunder disapproval at citizens who bring shame on their households. But those same laws are curiously less concerned with what happens in carefully licensed spaces that everyone pretends are invisible. A soldier who strolls too obviously into a registered brothel near his barracks might be fined, not because the house exists, but because he has walked into it with insufficient discretion. The law punishes the posture more than the act. An Edao making his rounds at night becomes a kind of actor in the civic performance. He might pass a doorway from which laughter and the light of 2 lamps spill into the street. Officially, he is there to ensure fire safety, to collect fees, to prevent public disorder. In practice, he counts the lamps, notes the license tag, and then looks away with the same studied disinterest modern people reserve for the search histories on other people's phones. His wax tablet is full of numbers and addresses, not descriptions. His job is to keep the ledger neat, not the morals. The city participates in this selective vision. In the morning, when the first sunlight creeps into the Subura, someone will wash the thresholds, straighten the curtains, maybe even repaint a symbol that has chipped overnight. Mothers hurry past with baskets, children in tow, focusing carefully on the bakery door at the end of the street. The alley that last night echoed with tintinnabula and hired laughter now smells of fresh bread and damp stone. If anyone notices a small bronze disc lying forgotten in a corner, they might kick it into the gutter without comment. Rome loves continuity. It also loves the illusion that the night was just a rumor. Some habits make the city run, even if nobody writes them into law. Keep tokens in one jar, coins in another. Keep the patrol routes memorized. Know which corner the vigils, the city watch, prefer for their own naps. If you must enter one of these houses, use only 1 lamp and make sure it is an ordinary one, not a flashy colored glass import that will be noticed. If your name ever appears in a ledger, it is better for it to be next to the word owner or tenant than complainant or offender. Romans understand that paperwork is just another kind of street. Once you step into it, you leave tracks. For the quieter observer, the sort who stands at the edge of the alley and does not go in at all, there is another lesson. You begin to see how the empire manages its contradictions. It cannot erase desire, so it counts it. It cannot forbid all pleasure, so it regulates the lamps and hallways through which pleasure moves. It creates little pockets of controlled chaos, wrapped in curtains that do not face the forum, and then it pretends not to remember their exact addresses, even as it taxes them every year. As the night stretches on, the lamps burn lower. The ediles finish their rounds and head back toward more official-looking buildings. Curtains still stir, but more slowly. The bells ring less often. Somewhere, a chalk list of fines has been wiped clean. A new one will take its place tomorrow. The alley grows drowsy, like the city itself. Even the painted phalluses on the walls seem to lose their energy, reduced to faint shapes in the dark. In this drowsy hour, it is easy to imagine making a small oath, not a grand legal one, just a personal promise for walking past. You might vow to remember that cities always have 2 maps, the one scratched in marble on official monuments, and the one scratched in tiny letters on the backs of doors and ledgers. You might promise to notice, in any city you visit, which doors do not face the main square, which bells ring shyly, which signs speak in symbols rather than words. And perhaps you also promise to let the details drift away as you fall asleep, knowing that somewhere in the archaeological layers of your mind, a tiny bronze token and a fading piece of graffiti will still be there waiting quietly long after the rest of the story has closed its curtains for the night. You might not expect a city that wrote philosophy on marble to hide its sex life behind crooked little side doors, but Rome very much did. The official city you see on triumphal arches goes to bed early. Another city waits behind curtains and alleyways that never quite face the forum. Tonight we walk in that second city, not for scandal, just for paperwork, floor plans, and the faint sound of a bronze wind chime someone forgot to dust. If you are still awake by the time we get to the tax rolls for wine mixed with water, you can subscribe or follow or do whatever people do now. Or you can already be asleep and let the algorithm guess. Rome, in any case, will not take attendance. You stand at the edge of the Subura as daylight is being erased with a slow charcoal gray gradient. The respectable streets near the Forum are closing themselves like heavy books. Shutters slide, shopkeepers sweep, senators practice looking tired in public. Here in the Subura, however, the evening is only beginning to unfold its tricks. The main streets are straight enough, but every few steps a side alley peels away like a loose page. None of these alleys point cleanly toward the Forum. That is deliberate. A door that faces the seat of power invites questions. A door that faces another wall invites nothing at all. The hinges of these doors are shy. They open inward, often behind hanging curtains instead of proper portals. So from the street, you mostly see an anonymous square of linen breathing in and out with the movement of the warm night air. Painted phalluses serve as signposts, an entire silent vocabulary of arrows and symbols that seem childish until you realize they are a traffic control system for desire. You know which way to walk, not because anyone tells you, but because the walls have been very clear in their own very unsubtle way. Inside one of those cubicula, the room is smaller than the privacy it sells. A brick bed is built into the wall, just wide enough for the night's transaction and tomorrow morning's backache. A niche holds a small lamp. The flame is not entirely sure it wants to stay lit. Prices might be scratched discreetly into the plaster, written so small you need to lean in, which is part of the strategy. If you have to read closely, you are already committed. Some houses add a little wind chime made of bronze or shells hanging above the curtain. It sounds pleasant in theory. In practice, it mostly collects dust and rings only when the curtain moves too fast, which is exactly the moment when you do not want extra attention. So it sits a decorative witness to other people's decisions. The walls are always listening, but the magistrates pretend not to. You keep your voice low. The wall hears better than any official guard and is more patient. Out in the alley, the vigils begin their rounds. They are the city's fire brigade and night watch, counting lamps as carefully as a modern building inspector counts emergency exits. Too many dark doorways mean fire risk. Too many bright ones mean trouble as well. They carry tablets for fines, ready to remind householders that Rome fears fire more than gossip. Night in the Subura is allowed, but only if it remembers its manners. Respectable women in stola and veil make a point of leaving before true darkness falls. The meretresses, the registered sex workers, dress with the opposite logic. They signal not with modest fabrics, but with colored wigs. Loose cloaks called tob that resemble male dress, and a posture that says they are not trying to fool anyone. A freedwoman might move cautiously, hugging the walls. A slave can pass almost anywhere, invisible in plain sight. A citizen man walks as if the city belongs to him, although he avoids being seen at the wrong curtain. You notice that everyone pretends to be going somewhere else. The street is a stage where nobody admits they are part of the play. Once the lamps are lit and the first customers have vanished into brick rooms, another Rome wakes up with ink and wax. For brothels and registered houses, desire is not just tolerated. It is entered in ledgers. A lino, the manager of such a place, must declare the house. A woman who works there registers her status. It sounds clinical, almost bureaucratic. Your name, perhaps or perhaps not your real one, written on a tablet alongside a fee. Gossip becomes revenue as soon as it is taxed. The aedile, that magistrate with the tired eyes and the permanent ink stains on his fingers, is responsible for keeping track. His office does not bless anything. It simply notes it like a citywide spreadsheet done in wax. If you could flip through those tablets, you would see not romance, but columns of amounts. Lamp oil, rent, bodies, fines, repairs to the threshold. Somewhere in that quiet sum is the price of everyone pretending nothing is happening. Proof of legality hangs on the door in the form of tags, small lead tokens, or even wax tablets stamped with the Edile's mark. They look oddly like the little inspection stickers you sometimes see on elevators now, except with fewer safety guarantees. One stamp says, "This house pays." Another implies, whatever happens beyond this curtain was seen, at least in theory, by the law. Wine is measured by the sextarius. Water is added when regulation insists on dilution. This is not because anyone worries about overindulgence, but because soldiers who visit should be able, in theory, to walk back to barracks without falling into an open sewer. In practice, the mixture ratio is calibrated less for safety and more for profit. You can almost hear the debate. If half wine and half water is legal, is 2/3 water technically more virtuous or simply more creative accounting? Walk a little farther down the alley and you begin to notice how each doorway advertises itself. The rooms and their signals form a quiet, unsleepy language. Above one door, a small bell or tintinnabulum hangs, sculpted with tiny figures that may be deities or maybe jokes, depending on how long you stare. There's a rumor that these bells keep away the evil eye. Another rumor says they simply catch the attention of passing customers who are trying very hard not to look. Inside, the walls carry faded frescoes that promise more than the modest brick bed can really deliver. The picture speaks so the people inside do not have to. A curtain tied in a particular knot might mean occupied. 2 lamps at the entrance could mean busy. 1 lamp placed farther back in the hallway might mean wait. These traffic light systems rarely appear in legal text, but they live stubbornly in local habit. You realize that most rules that matter are enforced by gestures, not inscriptions. By now you have noticed the small bronze discs that pass from hand to hand. They are called spintriae by modern collectors, although the Romans did not leave us an instruction manual. On one side a number, on the other a very frank little scene involving 2 or more participants in arrangements that would not fit on a respectable tombstone. No emperor's face, no solemn motto, just the sort of picture that makes museum catalog writers choose their adjectives carefully. Some people say these were brothel tokens, a sort of prepaid voucher. Others argue they were gaming pieces, or entry checks for private clubs, or even a naughty version of cloakroom tickets. Whatever their official purpose, they move easily in the semi-dark. You feel the weight of one in your palm. It is heavier than its size suggests, like a rumor that has picked up extra embellishments on the way down the street. The economy of these tokens has its own small logic. They allow someone to pay in advance without saying very much. They allow a house to keep account of services without writing awkward descriptions. They are also convenient for the laundry. A token in a bowl can stand in for washed sheets in a way that is mercifully free of detail. Imagine a shelf in the back room with shallow dishes, each holding a neat pile of discs, each disc a future story that nobody will officially record. In modern terms, it is as if someone invented a gift card system, except the card is brass and comes with artwork that would violate most app store guidelines. The strangest part is how normal it becomes. To a regular customer, a spintria is no more exotic than a subway token. To the city's moralists, it is one more sign that the world is going downhill, as it apparently has been since the invention of mixed bathing. If the tokens are the quiet currency of the night, the walls are its oversharing diary. Graffiti in Pompeii and elsewhere preserve fragments of this world with an honesty official inscriptions never risk. On one wall, someone boasts of his performance with a particular girl, naming both of them with cheerful indiscretion. On another, a worker complains that the prices have gone up since a new Lino took over. There are price lists scratched in hurried letters. So much for this, double for that, a discount if you bring your own oil. Some remarks are impatient, some tender, some absurdly practical. One hand, perhaps bored while waiting, simply wrote, "I was here." proving that ancient people invented the like button long before software did. Whitewash crews try to keep up, covering the inscriptions with fresh plaster. The next night, new words appear. The Senate may pass laws, the walls keep minutes. As you read these lines, you realize that the city's memory does not belong to marble monuments at all. It clings instead to cheap plaster that flakes at a touch. The Senate records names of consuls. The alley records who skipped paying for a drink. When a complaint is scratched about a customer who owes money, the entire neighborhood becomes the collection agency. The threat is not divine wrath, but social annoyance. There's a kind of justice here, diluted but persistent. If you misbehave, someone will write about you in a place you cannot easily edit. In that sense, the Subura invents a user-generated review system long before the internet. 5 stars for prompt payment, 1 star for the man who broke the lamp and pretended he did not. Beyond individual houses, the city pretends to regulate everything with high-minded laws that do not like to look at their own subject. The Lex Iulia roars against adultery from the lofty heights of moral reform. It is very fierce on tablets and quite shy in alleys. Officially, respectable married women are not supposed to be here at all. If they are, lawyers must work hard to define what counts as here. A soldier wandering into a licensed house may face a fine. A miner wearing a striking purple-edged cloak might be turned back at a corner by a vigilant slave instructed to keep the clientele within socially acceptable parameters. In practice, enforcement is uneven. The aedile walks the street not as a moral guardian, but as a living ledger. He is interested in whether taxes are paid, lamps are maintained, and buildings will not collapse on paying customers. You can almost see the shrug. What adults do behind curtains is their affair, provided the curtain itself was inspected that year. The law's vision is selective. Certain acts are loudly condemned in public speeches, yet quietly tolerated in specific licensed spaces. Adultery with the wrong sort of woman can ruin a citizen. Intercourse with a registered prostitute counts differently, as if the law puts quotation marks around it. Some clients allegedly register themselves under false names to create legal fictions, the way modern people might create burner accounts. It is a complicated, fussy system, and that is exactly why it works. Complexity makes everything feel official and therefore oddly respectable. Rome has mastered the art of looking away with one eye while checking the receipts with the other. As the night thins toward dawn, you step back and watch the whole scene fade. A last customer leaves, tying his cloak with the same gesture he used before entering, as if nothing has happened. The tintinnabula above the doors finally fall silent. Lamps are pinched out, their smoke swirling into the gray light like thoughts someone decided not to finish. House slaves sweep thresholds, erasing footprints that never officially existed. Graffiti waits under a thin layer of dust for the next hand to add another opinion. Somewhere up on the Palatine, a senator is waking into a clean morning in which none of this is mentioned, at least not before lunch. Before we go, you can take a small private oath, the kind nobody writes down. Keep the facts in one jar, tokens, taxes, patrols, names on wax. Keep the legends in another jar, whispered stories of emperors disguising themselves to visit these streets. Dramatic scandals that almost certainly grew taller each time they were retold. Label both jars quietly and put them on a high shelf in your mind. If you ever walk through a modern city at night and notice how certain doors do not quite face the main street, how certain windows glow a little too steadily, you will recognize the pattern. Human behavior does not update as quickly as building codes. At dawn, the bronze chimes stop. The chalked price lists fade as shopkeepers hose the pavement, and Rome pretends again that the night was just a rumor. You are free to pretend with it, or to close your eyes and let the footsteps of the vigils, the ring of unseen tokens, and the whisper of painted arrows dissolve slowly into the kind of silence where sleep finally decides to show up. You might not expect the angle of a doorway on a noisy Roman side street, to decide whether the law pretends you exist tonight or not, but in the Subura, it more or less does. You step into the evening at the point where the respectable city and the unofficial one graze, past each other like two cloaks brushing in a crowd. The sun is technically still up somewhere behind the hills, but down here the light is already secondhand, rinsed through cooking smoke and laundry lines, and the first oil lamps are being coaxed awake. Someone shakes one, listening for the slosh of olive oil the way you might check a phone battery. Doors are not allowed to face the forum. The main avenues are for business, temples, triumphs, and the occasional lost senator. The streets that matter tonight kink sharply away from that world. They are alleys that begin like accidents and then keep going on purpose, twisting until you are no longer sure which way the capital wing is. Above the alley, little terracotta phalluses dangle from strings, pointing like arrows toward places you are officially not supposed to notice. They clink in the breeze, cheap good luck charms against the evil eye, and also, conveniently, an advertisement that requires no literacy. You pass shutters that are still firmly closed. The day shift of Roman life is slow to admit that it is over. Bakers clear ash from their ovens. A mule nuzzles an empty sack. Someone argues about grain weights in a voice meant for the gods and the neighbors. Inside a narrow doorway, a brick cubiculum waits with a bed only slightly wider than a person and a niche in the wall ready for a lamp. From the street, you can see almost nothing. Curtains instead of doors breathe in and out with the movement of people, so the line between inside and outside feels like a lung. Prices are written in scratched letters so small that you can read them only if you lean too far in, which is, of course, the point. You keep your voice low without thinking about it. The walls here hear better than any magistrate. The city has rules about who is even allowed to walk in this quarter after dark, and more importantly, how they should look while they do it. You notice that respectable matrons in proper stola dresses have already gone home. A woman out at this hour without a husband or a very obvious errand risks being mistaken for a meretrix and, more awkwardly, taxed like one. Those who actually are registered meretrices are required to mark themselves somehow, not with neon signs, but with details, a colored wig, perhaps, or loose cloak of a style that the law pretends to recognize at a distance. It is a strange form of civic fashion police where the fine print lives in fabric folds. Slaves thread through the crowd more freely. They are technically property, and the law worries less about property catching a bad reputation. Freedmen move carefully. Their status is newly earned and still a little fragile. Citizens who insist on being here pretend not to move at all. They stand as if waiting for a friend or a cousin or an answer from the gods, and then, when no one is looking, they drift sideways through a curtain. Night is allowed, but only if it remembers its manners. Somewhere behind you, the vigils, Rome's night watch, count their lamps and murmur about fire hazards. They carry tablets for fines, not swords, and their job is to warn of sparks, both the literal kind that might burn 10 insulae to the ground, and the social kind that might annoy a senator. If you are still awake by the time we get to the tax system for desire, you are entirely welcome to subscribe to this stroll, at least in your head. But really, if sleep arrives first, the vigils will not record a complaint. As the alleys grow darker, the city quietly insists on paperwork. Somewhere not far from the Subura, an edile sits with a register that smells faintly of wax and smoke, listing names that have officially entered the book. A pimp, Alino, has registered his house. A woman has registered her status. The process turns gossip into revenue with the efficiency of a mill converting grain into flour. To be a licensed brothel, the house must belong to someone whose name is written down. And the person working there must also have a declared identity, even if it is not the one she was born with. In Rome, you are not so much punished for vice as fined for it, and the fines make better sense if the ledgers are in order. The state discovers that the empire is easier to regulate when it can be counted, and what it cannot erase, it quietly enumerates. A small lead tag or wax tablet might serve as proof that everything is legal enough for tonight. The edile seal, stamped on a document, becomes a kind of permission to ignore the details. You can imagine the conversation. Is this house allowed? Yes, look, here's the seal. The law has seen it once, and therefore no one else needs to look too closely. Numbers creep into everything. Wine here is measured not by guesswork, but by the sextarius. A standard cup keeps auditors happy. When a law suggests that water must be added to wine before sale, it is not because anyone objects to strong drink. It is because watered wine can be taxed at a particular rate. You realize that the Empire's main talent is not military conquest, but extremely patient bookkeeping. The same habit reaches into the night sector. A registered brothel becomes, in theory, safer for customers and more profitable for the state. Names go into the book. Fees are noted. Inspections are possible, though probably not very enthusiastic. A late document is a dead document, so the smart Lino pays promptly and keeps the ledger smiling. You learn as you shuffle past the lamplit doorways that Rome's trick for surviving its own contradictions is simple. Regulate what you cannot erase, then count it. Inside the thresholds, the rooms speak their own language, one that makes the written Latin on official edicts seem almost shy. Bells called tintinnabula hang at some doorways. Little bronze things shaped like animals or oddly cheerful phalluses, chiming when a curtain is brushed aside. Each ring is part good luck charm, part advertisement, part warning to the envious that someone inside has at least enough money for a quick visit. The walls are painted with pictures that promise more than they explain. Symbols do most of the talking so that words do not have to. A curtain of a particular color might mean that the room is taken. Another signals wait. A second lamp placed in a specific niche means hurry. A knot in a cord might be a private code between worker and regular client. None of these signals are written in any law, but they travel faster than edicts when they fit neatly into a gesture. You walk past, pretending to have somewhere very serious to be, while your peripheral vision collects a whole taxonomy of lamps, knots, colors, and discrete coughs. Now and then the evening narrows down to something as small as the weight of a coin in your palm. Only, strictly speaking, it is not a coin. Some customers in ancient Rome paid with objects now called spintriae, little bronze or brass tokens about the size of a fingernail clipping from the Colosseum, stamped on one side with a number and on the other with a scene that could not be shown on your average temple frieze. The images are energetic enough that later archaeologists blush on your behalf. No emperor's face appears on these discs. Apparently, even in a culture comfortable with marble statues missing most of their clothing, no one wants to see the princeps sharing a tiny metal space with such activities. The tokens might have been brothel tickets, or gaming counters, or bath checks with a sense of humor. Scholars argue politely over them, which means that no one really knows, and the debate can continue forever, providing employment to footnotes. You roll an imaginary one between your fingers and notice that it weighs less than a rumor, but travels just as far. The walls of this district remember everything, even when the ledgers pretend to forget. On one plastered surface surviving in Pompeii, someone has scratched a list of services and prices, perhaps in a hand that never expected archaeologists with flashlights. Nearby, another graffito complains about a lover's performance with the brevity of a modern review. The Senate never intended to read these comments. The buildings collected them anyway. A name plus a symbol can function as a contract. Erase the symbol and the contract sighs away like lamp smoke. But graffiti has a habit of clinging where it is not wanted. Dates, boasts, insults, and accounting notes crowd each other in cramped letters. Successus loves Iris in one corner. New Chariot defeated in another. I've been here nearly everywhere. The effect is less erotic than administrative. It feels like an impatient chorus of "Don't forget I existed," written in lime wash and scratching. Whitewash can cover a wall by morning, but the next night a fresh line appears. The chalk of today's price list fades under dust. The chalk of tomorrow arrives with new enthusiasm. In its sleepy way, the Subaru runs a 24-hour comment section. Overhead, the laws keep humming like a background instrument that no one thinks about until it goes off key. Rome has serious statutes about adultery lex, Eolia thunders about respectable married people wandering into the wrong beds, but those laws mostly aim at elite scandals. The licensed brothel stands technically outside that orchestra. A citizen entering such a house may be frowned at by moralists and lightly fined if caught. But the real problem, from the state's point of view, is not time. It is unregistered revenue. A soldier risks trouble if he visits a house reserved for citizens or steps into a district where he is not allowed. An unfortunate junior officer might be fined an amount that makes him consider celibacy for at least a day. A miner in a purple-edged cloak is turned back at the corner, the way a modern club bouncer might raise a lazy eyebrow at someone without ID. The E-dial does not need to shout. A small shake of the head toward the virtuous side street is enough. The city's posture adjusts accordingly. By day, Rome stands up very straight. Its back to the forum, eyes focused on speeches and shrines. At night, the same city leans slightly sideways, like someone pretending to study a wall relief while actually reading the smaller sign beneath it. A ledger rests quietly in an office, its pages closed, but its existence keeping everyone honest enough. The moral code and the tax code have agreed, for the evening, not to look directly at each other. You can almost hear them mutter, "As long as you pay on time, we saw nothing." It is a kind of civic sleepwalking. And then the night loosens. Lamps burn lower, the air cools. Someone dumps a bucket of water into the gutter and the smell of spilled wine, sweat, and yesterday's fish gradually drowns under damp stone. You start thinking about how to walk past all this as if you had never noticed it. Romans developed a quiet art for this, the practiced, slightly bored stare straight ahead, combined with just enough sidelong attention to avoid stepping on anyone's sandals. Keep facts in one mental jar: tokens, taxes, patrol routes, and keep legend in another: whispers, signs, and arrows painted on walls. If you must enter, the rule of thumb is to do it small. One lamp, one coin, one name written wrapped away. The city runs on reversible steps. What can be washed off tomorrow is safer than what chisels into stone. At dawn, the bells that hung in the doorways sound different. Their chimes blend with the noise of shop shutters lifting and roosters doing their best impression of authority. Curtains cool, chalk lists fade under the dust raised by the first carts heading toward the markets. A few of last night's customers step back into daylight, adjusting cloaks and expressions to something more civic. Rome stretches, yawns, and pretends that the night was only a rumor, a story someone else told. Officially, the streets you just walked are merely part of a busy residential quarter. The little tokens, the ledgers, the painted signs, the soft laws that bent without quite breaking, all of that folds itself between the lines of daylight business. You carry the memory of it like a faint oil smell on your sleeve. It is not dramatic. Nothing exploded. No revolution began in that narrow alley. Instead, you saw a city doing what cities do best, arranging its contradictions into a schedule and then writing them down in several copies. If you drift off now, the Subaru will keep going without you. The lamps will be trimmed again this evening. The bells will tinkle. The vigils will count their fines. The walls will collect new sentences. Sometime tomorrow, a clerk will add another line to the ledger in a hand so neat it almost looks pious. Somewhere, a small bronze token will slide from one palm to another, light as a thought you had before sleep and forgot. And the streets will continue to pretend that they are just streets, while the city, half awake, walks past with its eyes mostly closed. You might not expect that a small bronze token with an extremely enthusiastic engraving could tell you more about Roman city planning than a marble monument, but here we are, walking very slowly into the night streets of ancient Rome. The city is settling into its evening rhythm. Oil lamps pop into existence one by one like sleepy stars. And somewhere in the Subura district, a wooden door that is not quite a door swings inward a few centimeters, just enough to suggest that it does not want official attention. If you're already feeling your eyes get heavy, that's perfect. If you somehow remain awake all the way to the tax records on illicit wine, you can subscribe or follow or do whatever people do now. But honestly, if you fall asleep halfway through an explanation of street patrol regulations, that's probably the healthier choice. Imagine yourself in the Subura after sunset. It is not the grand postcard Rome, the forum with speeches, or the temples with tidy columns. This is the district where the streets are too narrow for heroic statues, where balconies lean in like gossiping neighbors, and where respectable people insist they never go at night while knowing exactly which alley not to take. Officially, brothels are not supposed to open onto dignified squares or main roads, so doors step politely aside. Many of them face inner courtyards or sideways alleys, like shy actors standing in the wings. Instead of heavy carved doors, a curtain hangs in the doorway, moving with every draft of warm air from the street. Curtains have the advantage of legal ambiguity. A door can be inspected. A curtain is just enjoying the breeze. If anyone asks, the building is simply a tavern, or a lodging house, or, in one salad of creativity, a place with rooms for resting and other unspecified necessities. Inside one of these places, the architecture is strangely uniform. A typical room is a cubiculum, not much larger than the bed it contains. The bed is brick or stone with a mattress that has opinions about anyone who lies on it. To save space, the niche for the lamp is built into the wall, high enough that you won't accidentally kick it over in a moment of clumsiness, low enough that the soot slowly decorates the ceiling like a half-hearted fresco. On the plaster, you might see murals that are both extremely explanatory and extremely redundant, because nobody is here for narrative subtlety. Prices, when written, are in numerals so small, you almost have to lean in nose first to read them. That leaning in movement creates a private moment, a little bubble of negotiation, even if the number is fixed. Someone thought this through. Out in the alley, the social choreography is more complicated than anything going on inside. The Romans were very concerned with who was allowed to walk where and how obviously. Respectable women in stola and veil are expected to be at home by this hour. If they are in the street at night, the assumption is that they are on their way somewhere they shouldn't be, and the law finds that inconvenient. Prostitutes, by contrast, are supposed to be visible in a controlled way. A meretrix might wear a colored wig or a loose, short cloak that advertises not so much her profession as the fact that she is not pretending otherwise. Slaves move easily. Their movements belong to their masters. Freedmen walk with a careful posture, upright but not too confident, as if the citizenship paperwork might crack if they moved too fast. Citizens of high rank are technically not supposed to do much of anything here after dark, so they dress down and keep their rings turned inward. The city pretends there is a neat boundary between night commerce and day respectability. The street lamps know better dot at corners. The vigils, Rome's night watchmen, manage the delicate art of looking busy while trying not to see too much. Their official job description involves fire control and basic policing, but everyone understands that they are also human notice boards. They carry tablets for recording fines, and they count lamps, not people, when they patrol the streets. As long as the lamps are lit, the assumption is that order, or something like it, continues. An unlit stretch of street is suspicious. Too many lamps in one place suggests a party that might need a later entry in a logbook. The vigils pass by brothel alleys with the casual precision of people who know exactly when they will be given a free cup of wine to keep walking. Citizens tell themselves that Roman order is enforced by solemn magistrates in white togas. In practice, it is enforced by tired men with buckets, scratchy cloaks, and a very detailed sense of where the noise should be coming from. Behind the nightly rhythm is a quieter machinery of licenses and ledgers, because Rome, like many large systems, copes with moral discomfort by inventing paperwork. Brothel keepers, linones, are supposed to register their establishments. A house is listed under a name, often a nickname, sometimes the owner's. Occasionally something scenic like the House of the Little Birds, which sounds innocent until you read the fine print. Women who work there may also be registered with the authorities, a bureaucratic recognition that if vice cannot be eradicated, it can at least be counted. There's a fee, of course. Rome does not waste a taxable opportunity. In a city where water has a price and shade can be rented, desire is no exception. When you walk through these streets at night, you walk through a kind of open-air spreadsheet. Evidence of this comes from decrees and tax lists that sound suspiciously like a to-do list written by someone both tired and practical. Aediles, the magistrates in charge of markets and public order, have to inspect brothels. They are not believed to enjoy this duty, at least not officially. They check that the building is structurally sound, that fires are controlled, that no one is pretending to be more respectable than they are registered as. They can find an owner for a collapsed staircase as well as for unlicensed activity. It is less about virtue and more about avoiding accidents and riots. Somewhere in a dusty office, a scribe notes that a certain house in a certain insula paid a certain amount, and that the inspection passed with only minor complaints about damp walls. That scribe may not know it, but thousands of years later, scholars will peer at his handwriting to understand how Rome priced morality to prove that someone or something is licensed. Simple objects become legal instruments. A lead tag with a stamp mark can show that a brothel is authorized, that the wine sold inside is officially taxed, or that the owner has paid a fee to operate. The little disc does not look like much. It fits in the palm, cool and heavy, with a symbol impressed on one side. It is the ancient equivalent of a sign on the wall that says, "Yes, the city knows we exist. Please stop pretending you're surprised." Water is measured by the sextarius, wine by the cup, and sign by the token. Rome quietly discovers a principle embraced by many societies after it. If you can't erase a behavior, you can put it in the ledger, assign it a column, and congratulate yourself on regulation. The signals used on the streets themselves are quieter, but just as coded. A curtain color might hint at the price range. A knot tied in a certain way at the doorway suggests that regular customers are welcome and casual passers-by are less so. A second lamp lit next to the first can mean that there is free space inside, or that special services are available depending on the neighborhood. All of this can be denied with a straight face if questioned. The second lamp? It was dark, and we thought more light would be pious. The walls listened to every excuse. The chalk marks on them tell a more detailed story. The most charmingly confusing objects from this world are the so-called spintrii, small bronze or brass tokens stamped with scenes that leave very little to the imagination and numbers that seem, at first glance, to be part of some lost pricing system. They do not show emperors or gods. They show people in various energetic arrangements, accompanied by numerals from the 1st to 16. For a long time, historians were quietly puzzled. Were these gaming counters? Tokens for bathhouses? Tickets for theater seats that no one now wants to talk about? The favorite theory, the one that makes the most sense for our walk tonight, is that they were brothel tokens. Instead of fumbling with change in an awkward hallway, a client might purchase a token in advance and hand it over quickly. It would be, in essence, a prepaid card with a very explicit illustration of the service already chosen. Imagine the everyday awkwardness the system removes. You approach the establishment pretending you are absolutely here by accident and just looking for a friend. You slip the token into a familiar hand. No price discussion, no haggling at the doorway where neighbors might overhear. The transaction has already been converted into a small, anonymous disc, heavy but silent. The staff know what the number implies. The city, theoretically, can count tokens if anyone is dutiful enough to report them. In the modern world, loyalty cards and contactless payments do something eerily similar, except that most of them do not come engraved with a polite instructional diagram. Spintriae are not the only things the night streets use as memory devices. The walls themselves are busy notebooks. In Pompeii, which froze an entire city's graffiti and volcanic ash, we can still see the mixture of advertisement, complaint, and gossip that must have also decorated Rome's less preserved districts. Brothels, taverns, and inns sometimes record prices or offerings directly on the stucco. At Nuceria's, for such and such a coin, you will find such and such a delight. One scrawl might proclaim, entirely untroubled by modesty. Another, written presumably by a customer with a sense of humor or grievance, might comment on the quality of service in terms that modern review platforms would recognize instantly. Minus the star rating, some graffiti are not about sex at all, but about debts, favors, and arguments that happen to pass through these same spaces. A boast about winning in dice is scratched next to a crude drawing of a ship. Below it, someone has added "liar" in a different hand. A shop sign painted in red letters half faded by time still lists a price for cheap wine. These walls remember which nights were busy, which names were whispered often, which jokes went out of fashion. Morning workers whitewash over old graffiti from time to time, like closing a notebook and starting a new page, but the layers remain. Archaeologists have found sequences where one advertisement for a certain house is repeatedly crossed out and rewritten slightly higher, as if the business kept insisting, "No, we're still here," while the paint flicked away. As we linger among these phantom walls, you can imagine how noise and smell fill in the blank spaces. Oil smoke, cheap perfume, sweat, garlic from someone's dinner eaten too quickly in a corner. Rome's nightlife is not glamorous, but it is very specific. And all of it operates under laws that pretend not to see it. Officially, adultery is illegal, and the Lex Iulia thunders against unfaithful wives and enabling partners. Respectable citizens are supposed to uphold family values. Yet the same lawmakers carve out exceptions for registered prostitutes and for certain licensed houses. If conduct is scandalous but properly filed, it is annoying rather than criminal. This is one of Rome's more enduring contributions to human governance. The ability to condemn a practice, loudly in public while quietly budgeting its tax revenue. Patrols and courts reinforce this double vision. A soldier caught entering a brothel in full uniform may be disciplined for dishonoring his unit. A minor, especially from a respectable family, is supposed to be turned away and reported. An aedile who is too visibly indulgent might give ammunition to rivals. People invent ways around the rules that would feel at home on any modern message board. Clothes are changed in nearby taverns. Friends are asked to stay on lookout, not for danger, but for acquaintances. Names and ledgers might be written in abbreviations that only locals can decode. To an outsider, this seems absurdly complicated. To the city, it is simply Tuesday night, yet for all the moral noise, everyday enforcement is often about money and basic order. The aedile does not want riots, fires, or unpaid taxes. If a house keeps the street quiet and settles its accounts, It blends into the urban background. The moments of real attention come when something breaks that quiet pattern. A patron refuses to pay and shouts in the street. A roof beam collapses during a storm. The whitewashed wall fails to hide a particularly offensive drawing about a local official. Then fines are issued, statements recorded. Perhaps one more law added to the already impressive stack of never do this again. Especially like that. And when the dust settles, the routine returns. Like a cart grinding along ruts in the road. If you stay a little longer in this imagined night, you can develop a kind of sleepy respect for the people who turned such an awkward, human, ill-defined part of life into something so bureaucratically tidy. There were tokens to hold, ledgers to sign, lamps to count, graffiti to paint over. There were coated wigs, carefully tied knots, curtains that pretended they were just curtains. It is absurd and also strangely reassuring. Rome did not resolve its contradictions. It filed them, stamped them, and hung a bell over the doorway as both invitation and warning. Somewhere above all of this, untouched by the lamps and whispers, the stars keep their own schedule, indifferent to licenses. The vigils finish a circuit and note that the number of lamps is acceptable. A last customer slips away, smelling of wine and oil. Someone chalks a comment on a wall and laughs softly to themselves. In a few hours, the sun will wash the alleys into less suspicious colors, and respectable citizens will stride through the same streets, pretending that they do not recognize the doorways. The tokens will sleep in drawers, the ledgers will close, and the curtains will look, for a moment, like simple cloth. You can let your mind drift with them. The details blur, the numbers on the tokens, the names on the lists, the snippets of graffiti and uneven letters. The city's muttering becomes a single quiet sound, like wind stirring through a very old library where someone has left the window open. Rome's forbidden streets keep on existing in the background of history, half remembered and half erased, and you do not need to keep track of any of it. You can just let the lamplight recede one doorway at a time, until there is only the faint idea of footsteps on stone and the comforting thought that somewhere even the walls are dozing off. You might not expect half-finished sentences on the plaster of a small Italian town to double as an accounting system, but they tried their best. In the alleys of Pompeii, before it became the famous frozen city, the walls behaved like a very slow, very dusty group chat. Words scratched with charcoal or red pigment lingered there longer than many of the people who wrote them. You can imagine yourself walking there with a small oil lamp, the sky not fully dark, the shops still breathing out the heat of the day, and everywhere, on every surface that stood still for more than a week, there's writing. Not the marble letters marched across official monuments, but little leading lines of everyday Latin. Complaints, prices, promises, and the occasional drawing that looks suspiciously like someone's boss. If you manage to stay awake while we stroll past several hundred meters of billable handwriting, you are very welcome to subscribe or follow or whatever the modern equivalent is. Honestly, if you're still conscious by the time we reach the section about chalk marks for overdue bar tabs, you've earned that decision, but please don't strain yourself over it. The first thing you notice about these walls is how busy they are. The town is not large, but the plaster behaves like a shared notebook. In one doorway, a quick hand has written, "Here lived Secundus," and then, almost as an afterthought, added the information that Secundus greeted his friends often. A small detail, but it tells you that plaques and doorbells were optional. If you wanted people to know who lived where, you simply wrote it. In another street, a neat list appears, a vertical line of names, each paired with a symbol. One has a small loop, another a cross, another something like a simplified fish. These are marks for those who could not write their own names, but still needed to sign for loans or deliveries. Put a name plus a mark on the wall beside the shop door, and it became in a loose chalk and plaster way, a contract. Whoever tried to pretend later that they had never ordered 6 jars of wine could be gently pointed to the wall. As long as the writing remained, the debt did too. Erase the mark with lime wash or a fresh coat of plaster and the agreement sighed away. Like deleting a message without leaving the scene notification, the script itself is casual. Official Latin has its long, careful forms. The Latin on these walls is hurried, misspelled, sometimes drifting between spoken dialects. The Senate would have frowned at it the way a modern grammar teacher winces at text messages without punctuation. You can almost hear the old men in white togas saying that handwriting is dying. But here, in the side streets, it works perfectly well. A baker writes down the day's prices, bread at the Spinny Asses, butter bread at a more, sweet loaves at a slightly extravagant sum that implies sugar or honey. The numbers step down the wall like little ladders. Tomorrow, if grain grows more expensive, he will cross them out and write new ones above. No one prints a menu. The menu is the plaster, updated as needed. Weather permitting, deeper into the town, you come to the Thermopolia. Those small counters where people bought hot food Roman takeout, essentially. Except you had to bring your own container, and no one misheard your name because they wrote it on the wall beforehand. Above one marble counter, framed by painted advertisements of steaming dishes, there are 2 lines of scratched verse. One promises that this is the best place for a hot drink, which is a charmingly vague boast in a world without coffee. The second line, almost definitely written by a rival or a disappointed customer, calls the drinks weak and the owner weaker. Ancient marketing and ancient reviews occupy the same square of wall. Knowledgeable locals, and now archaeologists, know to read the second line first dot as you walk. You realize that many of the messages are not meant to last more than a few weeks. Campaign slogans from elections coat the walls in overlapping layers. Vote for Helvius Sabinus, a good man, one says with mild optimism. Underneath, in a different hand, someone has added, he deserves the office, but his friends deserve it more. It is a strangely honest critique to leave beside a bakery. Over this, another candidate's supporters have painted their own name, using the older slogan as convenient background. Every few years, the town becomes an enormous flaking notice board, until the rains peel, the paint away, and the next generation begins again. If you pause here and press your shoulder lightly against the wall, the stone feels cool. The words under your fingers are only a few millimeters deep. They were never meant to survive centuries of excavation and tourism. They were meant to survive the evening. A lover writing, "Successus loves Iris, may she respond," was not expecting a future where his message would be studied under museum glass. He simply wanted Iris, or perhaps her friends, to see it before dawn. The fact that we read it now probably says more about volcanic ash than about romance. Asterisk in another street. The tone shifts from dreamy personal to extremely practical. An innkeeper has listed what is owed. Lucius, 2 nights and 3 measures of wine. Petronia, 1 night, 1 measure, and damage to bedding. Anonymous traveler, 1 night, 2 measures, and excessive singing. This last item is never explained, but immediately feels fair. You can imagine someone tapping the innkeeper's shoulder, asking why their name is on the wall, and receiving the calm reply that it will remain there until they pay. In a world without digital reminders, passive-aggressive plaster is surprisingly effective. It is also, you may notice, hard to ignore in your way to buy bread. Not all of the messages are written by merchants. Some are idle remarks that sound suspiciously like people, testing out the novelty of having a wall and a piece of charcoal at the same time. One line proclaims, "I marvel, wall, that you have not collapsed, bearing the weight of so many scribblings." This may be the earliest recorded complaint about cluttered comment sections, and yet the wall did not collapse. It simply stood there, absorbing more marvels, more names, more declarations that someone was here, that they had eaten, loved, paid, or perhaps failed to pay. The city used its masonry the way some people use napkins or the back of their hand, as temporary memory. Somewhere between these personal notes and business ledgers lies the realm of petty boasting. On a corner near the forum, a small inscription reads, "Meth, slave of Comenia, was here with Epaphra." Under it, someone else has scratched, "Epaphra, you are not good at ball games." It is not clear whether this is a critique from Meth, from a jealous rival, or from a third party dissatisfied with local sports culture. Either way, it demonstrates that even 2,000 years ago, people enjoyed leaving messages that would confuse future readers. A little further along, another hand states, "Gaius Pomedius Diphilus was here on October 3rd. The year given corresponds to what we would now call 78 BCE, making it an old version of writing the date on the underside of a desk. Time passes. Gaius moves on. The wall keeps the appointment much longer than he does. The fascinating, then gently amusing, element in all this is that these scrawls sometimes preserve more information than official documents. We have decrees about taxes and laws about public morals, but those seldom tell you that someone thought the bread in a particular bakery was terrible, or that one landlord was considered stingy with the firewood. Graffiti tells you that in the year 79, someone's neighbor played the flute badly enough that a complaint was engraved in stone. When historians reconstruct daily life, they lean over these walls like you are leaning now, reading not just the content of the messages, but the quirks, the hurried lines, the uneven spelling, the unusual slang. It is as if the town has left the ancient equivalent of voice memos everywhere, and the only thing missing is the tone of voice. If you are still awake, you might quietly notice how similar this feels to walking through a modern city that has not yet removed all the handwritten posters. Lost cats and upcoming concerts cling to lampposts. Discount haircuts and private tutoring occupy the edges. In Pompeii, the lamppost is just a reflective section of white plaster, and the cat is more likely to be a lost jar or cloak, but the impulse is the same. Someone writes, "Marcus lost his cloak in the baths." He will give a reward, and then days later, someone else adds underneath, "Found, but not returned." The humor is dry and probably maddening for Marcus, but very good for your sleepy amusement. The life cycle of these messages is simple. Someone writes them, often on top of older writing. They stay slowly fading, while rain, dust, and the brushing of shoulders gnaw the edges. At intervals, workers come with whitewash. This is exactly as exciting as it sounds. Lime is mixed with water until it becomes a viscous, milky liquid. Then, in long, gentle strokes, they paint over the writing. The letters blur and disappear. The wall returns to a blank, expectant silence. Contracts vanish. Insults are forgiven by the simple act of layering fresh plaster. Election promises melt into the same pale background as yesterday's dinner specials. The process is not dramatic. It is just maintenance, a kind of civic housekeeping that happens again and again. You could fall asleep just watching the roller slide back and forth, covering history in real time. Yet the next morning, the city wakes and the walls do what walls always do when given half a chance. They begin remembering again. A child, perhaps bored while waiting for a parent in the market, traces a small boat. A mason, proud of the straight line of bricks he has laid, writes his name above the doorframe. A couple drifting home after wine stops to leave a heart, and two names that will puzzle archaeologists into thinking they know who loved whom. The cycle repeats, quiet but stubborn. The walls do not ask why they must hold these stories, any more than a notebook asks why it is filled with shopping lists. They simply receive. Outside one bar, the wall acts almost like a scoreboard. Lines notch up beside a name to record how many drinks a regular has consumed on credit. The understanding is simple: more notches, more debt. When the customer finally pays, or when the innkeeper gives up, someone drags a wet sponge or a bit of rag down the column, smearing the charcoal lines into a gray streak. That smear is the memory of a transaction concluded, as surely as a bank statement. Perhaps the drinker feels relief. Perhaps he just sees a clean slate and thinks he has room for more notches. Either way, the wall holds his habits more diligently than any personal diary. Asterisk, asterisk, there is a softness to this system. Nothing here is carved with the permanence of a law code. Even insults, fierce in their moment, are made with materials that the next rain can loosen. One person scrawls that a certain shopkeeper is a thief. Another, perhaps the shopkeeper himself or a loyal friend, writes in slightly larger letters, "No, he is honest." An argument unfolds in handwriting, without anyone needing to stand and shout. Over time, the words blur together, and all that remains is a faint darkening in the plaster, a whisper where once there was indignation. It is the slowest, quietest comment thread you can imagine. Because the language is colloquial, we get odd little details. At one doorway, someone complains that a particular woman takes good money and does not wash. This is, among other things, a reminder that the ancient world had its own review culture, and that hygiene has always been a selling point. In another part of town, someone declares that he defeated his opponent by a large margin at a board game. He felt strongly enough about this triumph to inscribe it where everyone could see it, which says something about both his ego and the local entertainment options. These are not the grand heroes of epic poetry. These are the people who would today leave a 3-sentence review with a single star and a lot of capital letters. Except here, the letters are small and shaky and drifting down a stucco surface dot as evening settles. The graffiti takes on a different mood. Torches and lamps light up, making the walls glow unevenly. The same words that looked matter-of-fact under the sun now seem more intimate. Let anyone in love prosper, someone has written near a fountain. Nearby, another hand has added, and let anyone not in love drink. It could be a joke. It could be philosophy. It could simply be two friends entertaining themselves with chalk while waiting for someone else to arrive. The water in the fountain moves on, indifferent, but the plaster remembers both suggestions with equal care. All of this would have gone on, day after day, for years. Messages layered over messages, the walls quietly recording who owed whom a jar of oil, who fancied whom, who thought the local wine was watered down. The city used stone and plaster as an external hard drive for thoughts too casual to bother inscribing on tablets. There is something very gentle about that. No one expected their sentence to be immortal. They expected it to last until the next festival or storm. That modest expectation is what makes their survival feel slightly absurd now. We read, "Please bring back the 3 cloaks you borrowed," and we know, with the kind of certainty that belongs only to historians and insomniacs, that the cloaks never returned. You can stay here as long as you like. Leaning in close, breathing slowly, imagining the scratch of stylus against plaster. Each line you pick out with your eyes is a thread of someone else's ordinary evening. The baker noting the price of flour, the innkeeper tracking a noisy customer, the young person declaring that they were definitively here. Above you, the sky over Pompeii is quiet. The catastrophe that will one day freeze these words in place has not yet arrived, and in this moment, it does not have to. For now, the walls will continue to learn and forget at their own unhurried pace. Painted over, written on, painted again. Like the rise and fall of your breath. When you finally step back from the plaster and let the lamplight fall away, the words remain. They are still there, tucked into the roughness of the stone, whether you are reading them or not. That is what walls do. They listen longer than anyone intends. You can drift away now, knowing that somewhere, in the memory of a buried town, a complaint about bad wine and a declaration of undying love are quietly sharing the same patch of faded whitewash, and will go on sharing it politely long after you have closed your eyes. You might not expect that one of the sleepiest parts of Roman law is the bit that decides which sins count as crimes and which ones simply count as after dark. But here we are, in a city where the stones remember everything and the statutes very carefully look the other way. Tonight we are not following a hero or a scandal. We are following a rulebook that pretends to be shocked while quietly budgeting for the fines. If you somehow stay awake long enough for us to reach the part about how many witnesses are required, to prove adultery, you're perfectly welcome to subscribe. Though honestly, if you're still conscious at that point, the law might classify you as suspiciously alert. Imagine that the lamps have been burning in the Subura for hours. The alleyways behind the brothels are winding down. Oil pools in the base of a lamp, carbon crusts the rim. A last customer stumbles home, counting his small change tokens with more concentration than he gave to the conversation earlier. Somewhere up on the hill, the Senate sleeps behind heavy doors. But down here something else keeps watch. Not just the vigils with their buckets and hooks, but Rome's moral code, carved into bronze tablets and copied into endless legal commentaries. It says who is allowed to walk into these streets and walk out again without trouble. It says who may not be seen anywhere near them at all. Even if their feet itch with curiosity, the law that likes to be quoted is the Lex Julia, the Augustan law on adultery and sexual conduct. It reads like a stern parent who has just discovered nightlife. It thunders against married women who stray from respectable beds. It thunders a little more softly against men who help them. It carefully does not thunder against professional sex workers because, awkwardly, the empire relies on their taxes. So the law solves the problem in a very Roman way. It defines shame by status. A respectable matron caught in a brothel is a disaster. A registered prostitute in exactly the same room is a line item in the tax ledger. It is not the act that matters so much as the column under which the act is filed. Roman jurists, who are the sort of people you would definitely call if you needed help falling asleep, spend a great deal of effort explaining what counts as a respectable woman. She wears the stola, they say, a long garment that is practically a walking announcement of lawful marriage. She does not cover her hair like a slave. She does not dress like a meretrix. A meretrix, for her part, exists as a kind of legal lightning rod. Once registered, she absorbs scandal like a sponge. Men may visit her without the law calling it adultery, because the law considers her public, like a street one uses and never thinks. It is not a kind comparison, but it is a convenient one for bookkeeping purposes. Registration itself is bureaucratically dull. Somewhere in a magistrate's office sits a list, waxed and re-waxed, where names are added in a hand that is more tired than judgmental. A woman who wishes to become a meretrix appears with a witness. Perhaps a former owner if she was enslaved, and gives her name. The act is so quiet you could easily miss it. No trumpets, no speeches, just a stylus scratching, and with that, a human life is shifted from one column to another. The law notes her, the tax collectors note her, and the moralists, who have not been consulted, later claim they knew it all along. The same law that disapproves of adultery also draws meticulous lines around who may enter a brothel. Senators, of course, may not. Neither may their sons, or their grandsons, or anyone else whose dignity is considered too fragile to survive, being seen near a painted doorway. Soldiers are forbidden to, at least officially. If a legionary is caught in a brothel when he should be at his post, the regulations promise fines, demotion, or worse. This does not mean soldiers never appear in such places. It means that when they do, Everyone engages in the ancient art of not writing it down. The most Roman detail of all is that some violations matter only if they are seen. To convict a married woman of adultery, the Lex Iulia wants witnesses. 2 or 3 ideally, who can testify that they saw what they probably would have preferred not to. This requirement for observation turns the whole city into a kind of stage set, with curtains that may or may not be thick enough, a doorway. With a curtain instead of a wooden door is not just practical ventilation. It also gently suggests that nothing happening inside is secret, which is very useful for avoiding the charge of adultery and redirecting it into the safer category of transaction. So you can imagine how the night laws operate like a kind of dimmer switch. The same act, performed in a house on the main street, might lead to court cases and family councils. Performed 3 alleys away in a room that has a legal license, nailed discreetly near the entrance, it becomes invisible to the serious parts of the law. The moral code does not abolish desire. It simply builds corridors for it, like drainage channels for rainwater. In a city that could flood, this is considered prudence. In a city that never sleeps, it is also business. Asterisk every so often, an official has to make a show of caring very deeply. Aediles, who are responsible for public order, occasionally stage raids, not unlike health inspections in modern restaurants, except the checklist is a little different. They can fine a brothel keeper if the place is too close to a temple, too. Close to a respectable neighborhood, or too obviously advertising itself. Lamps that hang too brazenly over the street, pictures on walls that are more explicit than symbolic, noise that lasts past an unwritten hour. All of these can be grounds for a warning. The brothel keeper nods, promises improvement, pays a fine that is probably already budgeted for, and purchases a thicker curtain. The law has been satisfied. The wall, which is doing most of the actual hiding, receives no thanks. There are, tucked away in the commentaries, absurdly precise questions. A jurist will ask, if a woman is technically a prostitute but behaves like a respectable wife, what category is her visit to a neighbor? If a man enters a brothel only to look for a runaway slave, has he broken his oath to stay clear of such places? One opinion says no, provided he does not linger. Another says he should send someone else. You can almost feel the quill pausing over the parchment, trying to picture the appropriate number of heartbeats allowed between the doorway and the retrieval of the fugitive. Punishments, when they come, are rarely dramatic. Rome prefers exile and fines over imaginative torments, at least in the legal texts. A convicted adulterer might be sent to live on a dull island, which sounds almost restful if you ignore the part where your property is confiscated. The house where the adultery took place might be confiscated too, which is one of the reasons respectable families prefer their risky behavior to happen in rented rooms. Property law, not jealousy, is doing most of the heavy lifting. Meanwhile, the city's official posture is one of upright virtue. Statues show serious faces. Inscriptions praise chastity and discipline. But the streets under those statues are full of shortcuts and side doors. A senator who cannot be seen entering a brothel might own the building next to it and collect rent. A moralist who rails against tokens and graffiti might pass the same wall every morning, never quite seeing his own name scratched there with a suggestive little drawing beside it. The law looks where it is convenient to look and squints politely at everything else. If you listen to the city at night, you can hear the different layers of permission and pretense. The clink of a token in a palm, the subtle shuffling of sandals at a corner where 2 streets meet, the whispered question of a passerby unsure whether a curtain indicates a tavern, an inn or something less officially named. Above it all, somewhere on a hill, a clerk copies the same paragraphs of the Lex Iulia into another handbook for another young lawyer, who will one day confidently explain to a client which sins pay rent and which ones cost you your house. It is a very quiet sort of industry. Here and there, the law does bump into the walls in more practical ways. In some neighborhoods, brothels are ordered to paint their doors a particular color so that citizens can avoid them or not avoid them with precision. One street may be designated off-limits to prostitutes during religious festivals, as if desire were expected to detour politely around sacred processions. Notices are posted and then weathered, their letters running like tired ink. Someone is supposed to enforce them, but the vigils have fires to worry about. And a brothel with well-oiled hinges is less urgent than a warehouse full of amphory. By now, if your eyes are still open, you might notice how much effort goes into maintaining the illusion that the city disapproves of something it very carefully organizes. Rome's moral laws are a bit like those pop-up boxes in modern apps that ask, in the middle of some very specific behavior, whether you have read the terms and conditions. The question is less about your virtue and more about the system's need to say that it has warned you. Once you click I agree, the responsibility slides softly into a different column. As the night thins, the legal distinctions grow even fainter. The last customers go home. The lamps are pinched out. Someone sweeps the threshold of a brothel, pushing dust, wilted garlands, and a dropped hairpin into the gutter. The stones do not care whether the person who dropped the hairpin was technically a matron or a meretrix. They register only weight and motion. The law, however, continues to exist like a kind of invisible chalk drawing on top of the street, outlining where shame is supposed to stick. Dawn in Rome does something very similar to the law. It erases the more vivid traces and leaves behind the structures. The chalk list that a brothel keeper may have scribbled on a wall, prices maybe, or a note about a new girl from Spain or Syria, are washed off with a quick splash of water. Not because they are illegal necessarily, but because daylight prefers neutral surfaces. Inscriptions about taxes and street names are allowed to remain. They belong to the daytime city, the respectable one that guides delivery carts and magistrates' litters. Somewhere, a minor official walks past on his way to the forum, the folds of his toga arranged just so. He knows perfectly well what happens in these alleys after dark. In fact, part of his salary depends on the fines and fees collected there. But he has also sworn an oath to act according to the laws of the people and the Senate. The remarkable thing is that there is no contradiction. The laws themselves have written in the shadows. They forbid noble citizens to disgrace themselves. They allow others to occupy that space in exchange for revenue. The city's conscience is outsourced, one might say, to those with fewer rights. If you wander with him for a few streets, you will see how this works at the level of habit. He does not look directly at doorways with curtains. His gaze slides politely to the opposite wall, where perhaps a faded advertisement for a gladiatorial game still clings to the plaster. He will happily read the date and the names of the fighters aloud, if you ask. He will not read the smaller, more recent graffiti that advertises personal services with inventive spelling. His mind has learned a kind of selective blindness. The law, having been memorized, now lives in his posture. For ordinary people, the guidance is simpler and less theoretical. If you are a freeborn woman in a stola, you do not walk here alone at night. If you are a soldier in uniform, you choose a different street to cut through, unless you are off duty and have found a cloak that hides your rank. If you are a freedman with a small workshop, you might rent your upstairs room to someone who receives more guests than you do, but you make sure the lease is worded carefully so that any scandal stops at their threshold, not yours. The law, in other words, has turned into a set of bedtime stories grown-ups tell themselves. Do not cross this line. Do not speak to that person in public. Do not let anyone see you entering this door. Like all bedtime stories, they are a little inconsistent. but they help people sleep. We can turn this into a small oath for ourselves, if we like. A kind of tourist's promise whispered as you imagine walking through these streets in your mind. You promise not to be surprised that a city which carved gods in marble also carved loopholes in bronze. You promise not to be shocked that moral laws double as zoning regulations. You promise to remember that every dark doorway that worried an ancient moralist also paid for lamp oil, bread, and the school fees of someone's child. You do not have to approve. The law certainly pretended not to, even as it counted dot, and then, having noticed all of this, you also promise to practice the quiet Roman art of walking past. You let your attention drift from the curtained doors to the paving stones, from the chalk marks to the ruts worn by cartwheels. You listen not to whispers, but to the ordinary sounds of morning vendors setting up, to the creak of wagon axles, to a dog's bark echoing between walls. The night's secrets fold themselves away like shop signs being lifted back inside dot by the time the sun has climbed high enough to wash the alleys in honest light. The law has retreated to its tablets again. It will emerge at the next trial or public scandal, polished and grave, quoting itself. Until then, it dozes in the margins of daily life, a set of expectations everyone half remembers. The brothels will open again when the lamps are lit. The tokens will clink. The same actors will step onto the same stage, under the same rules that forbid and permit at once. You do not need to follow them. It is enough for now to imagine the last of the night's dust being rinsed into the gutter, the street drying, the city stretching like a tired animal, and the statues themselves sighing quietly as they settle back into silence. You might not think the position of a doorway, a few degrees left or right, could decide whether the law pretends to see you, or pretends you do not exist at all. Yet in a certain corner of ancient Rome, where the streets tangle downhill from the respectable hills into the busy, smoky Subura, the hum of the city after dark is organized around exactly this kind of small architectural shrug. Doors that do not face the Forum, doors that look sideways, doors that are technically present but politely unnoticeable. It is the kind of rule that makes very little difference to anyone trying to run an empire, and a great deal of difference to anyone trying to run a business after sunset. It is, in other words, ideal for bedtime. Imagine the lamps being lit one by one, oil waking with a soft hiss, their yellow circles wobbling against plaster that has seen better paint and worse decisions. The respectable day streets, the ones that lead toward the Forum and the temples, start to cool down like a baking tray taken off the fire. The side streets, though, are just getting warm. If you are still awake a little later, when we reach the part about municipal fee schedules and inspection stamps, you may subscribe or follow or do whatever modern people do. But honestly, if the tax system of the Subura hasn't lulled you to sleep by then, nothing I say is going to help more than a glass of water and a heavy blanket. For now, you're simply walking downhill with the crowd that pretends not to be a crowd. Behind you, the Forum. Ahead, a tangle of alleys that refuse to line up with anything important. Romans are very proud of their straight roads, the great imperial highways that march out like rulers laid across maps. The Subura is what happens when nobody uses a ruler. The lanes bend to avoid older buildings, older altars, older arguments. They sag and twist, and along the way, they turn houses so that their doors open not toward public life, but toward each other. A front door that faces a main street promises accountability. A door that faces a side passage promises discretion, or at least deniability. By lamplight, the facades start to whisper their code. A curtain instead of a wooden door, that is not what you find on a senator's house. A pair of painted, rather hopeful-looking phalluses on the wall, more advertisement than warning sign. Above them, perhaps, a crude painting of Venus, or just the letters F and R for rent, though everyone knows they mean more than floor space. Prices might be scratched small near the jam, in hand that looks hurried but is actually very practiced. To read them clearly, you have to lean in closer than any magistrate would admit to doing. It is a clever compromise between secrecy and marketing, the way some modern websites hide their most interesting buttons under 3 layers of menu just so everyone can say they tried. Inside, the space is very small. A brick cubiculum, a low bed or two, sometimes just a mat and a lamp niche. Walls carry old paint, cheap scenes from mythology that have somehow become part of the furniture. The air is half oil, half wine, and half impossibly someone frying something in a pan in the next room that is technically a different business but shares the same stove. A brothel in the Suburra can be a separate establishment with a name, or it can be the back room of anything. A tavern, a bakery, a building where the upstairs is rented to a very respectable family and everyone agrees not to think too hard about the sounds from below. Who is allowed to walk here and how is a kind of choreography. Respectable women in stola and veils go home early, their sandals clicking briskly up toward the quieter hills. A matron who wanders into these streets after dark either wants trouble or is terribly lost, and Roman society is not charitable enough to assume the second. Freedmen, foreigners, and slaves move more freely, if not more safely. The truly cautious send a slave in their place, a runner with instructions and a purse. One of the little jokes of the city is that a man can break several moral rules while technically remaining at home, just by giving very detailed instructions to someone else. Along the way, the vigils, the night watch, make their rounds. They count lamps, not people. An unlit doorway is a fire risk, and they are more worried about roofs catching than reputation smoldering. In one hand a bucket, in the other a tablet. For recording fines, they listen for the crackle of timber more than for whispers behind curtains. They have the power to knock, to inspect, to ask whether the place is properly licensed, but they generally prefer not to disturb the predictable habits of the neighborhood unless something is actually burning. After all, a stable vice district is much easier to patrol than a scattered, spontaneous one. The city, like a sleepy parent, would rather all the mischief happen in one room where it can be half supervised and half ignored that asterisk you follow their route a little longer, under balconies that lean over the alley with the weight of laundry and gossip. Somewhere a wind chime of bronze phalluses tinkles lazily, more comic than shocking after the 3rd or 4th block. The sound is part advertisement, part charm against envy, and part, frankly, decoration. If you focus on the small noises, the chimes, the liquid murmur of wine being poured, the shuffle of dice on a wooden board, your mind starts to lose track of the bigger structure, which is exactly what both the Suburra and this series are trying to achieve for you.